Some say the EU is already too big to speak with one voice. Others say the EU is still too small to compete with the US and China. Some say the EU must accommodate its neighbors so as not to lose them. Others say the EU has to remain much more than just an association of kind neighbors. Some say, others say. Welcome to the panel, Regional Perspectives, EU and its Neighbors.
Good morning, everyone. It is the very last day of this excellent conference. I would use this opportunity to thank once again the organizer, first of all, President Ilir, but also Roshan and his excellent team. It is a pleasure and joy to be here in Baku at this global forum. So let us start this last day of the conference with a very, very exciting issue, EU and its neighbors. Before I will invite very distinguished panelists to take the floor, I would like to say two things. Number one, I think we have three categories of neighbors at this very moment of EU. Number one, next full members. Then those who probably will not be a full member of EU, but will be part of this so-called political community. And the others, Russia and others. Number two, I think that one of the result of Russian aggression to Ukraine will be a new division in Europe. We've seen one after Second World War, Berlin Wall and all that stuff, until 1989. It was a division between democracy on the west and autocracy on the east. And I think we will see the very similar thing after the events that we are watching at this very moment. We will see the west of the Europe with Brussels in its core, EU and NATO, democracy, democratic values on one side. On the other side, there will be autocracy, and I would call it a Russian sphere of interest. Before I would ask the very first panelist to take the floor, I would add one additional thing to this second thing. Where the division will go in Western Balkans, it is extremely important for the security and political stability, not just of the region, but I think of the continent itself. It goes about Serbia. I know that we could have different opinions on how to manage relations from Brussels with President Vučić and his government and its Serbia. But in my view, the destiny, the political, geopolitical destiny of Serbia is very, very important, not just for Serbia and the region, but also for the whole Europe. If Serbia will finish at the end of the process on the other side, on the Russian side, that would be one situation. If, and I hope so very much, it will, if it will finish on the Western side, in our side, in Brussels' side, that would be some sort of relief. Then I think we should think about Western Balkans as a region of stability, peace, and prosperity. But okay, that has been my brief introduction. Let us invite Ambassador Ischinger to the floor. He's a distinguished expert on this field, doing with the security. Mr. Ambassador, what do you think when I've mentioned this division, Europe, European Union, democracy, and on the other side, Russia, autocracy, and the Russian sphere of interest? How do you see the future?
All right, good morning, and thank you very much, Mr. President. I feel honored to have the floor in the presence of so many senior representatives from the affected region. So let me start with exactly what you just said, and I think this is the essential point which we need to make here. When the European Union started to enlarge, initially from 6 to 9 to 12 to 15, etc., we were in an era of peaceful development. Today, we are in a situation where there is a war being waged in Europe, not some kind of small local conflict, but a war that has already cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives, a war waged by a nuclear power with threats of escalation, threats to peace and security, not only of eastern Ukraine or of Ukraine as a whole, but to the entire continent in a way. So in other words, the environment in which we're discussing what should, what must happen, what should not happen, is a totally different one.
It is.
From the situation in earlier decades. And that takes me to a fundamental point. I was a mid-level diplomat when in the European Union we developed the so-called Copenhagen criteria for membership. Really quite a bureaucratic process. And there are some people at this table and on this panel who had to go through this process in order to become members. That seemed to be okay because it really didn't matter that much whether chapter 15 was going to be finished this month or next month. But now that this continent is at war, is confronted by the threat of war and instability and conflict, we are under totally different circumstances. This is why I would just like to make a couple of very brief points. First of all, it is a shame, and of course I speak personally here, it is a shame that countries of the Western Balkans region have now been waiting since 2003 for a promise that was made in Saloniki in 2003 at an EU summit with the perspective of a membership. Here we go in 2024, 21 years later, very little has happened. This is a shame, and it is not commensurate with the challenge. In other words, my first point is, let's consider this an urgent matter, and we have not the time for another 5 or 10 years for this process to continue. Second point, in this classic accession process of the European Union, you have to complete the entire procedure, which is cumbersome. We're talking about tens of thousands of pages of laws and regulations. You're going to be sitting as a member in the EU Council only once the entire process has been completed. This is why I'm in favor of rethinking the entire process. I'm in favor of such concepts as a staged accession process. As a matter of fact, as a former German diplomat, I would say, is there any reason why the representative, of Bosnia-Herzegovina or of any of the other countries that are waiting should not sit, even now, in the meetings that deal with foreign policy, for example? What's wrong if they participate in the discussions? It's their continent and their future and their security just as much as it's our security. Of course, we cannot allow countries that have not yet completed the process to be voting and to be voting on funding, for example. That's also an obvious limitation. But in other words, I think we need to rethink the accession procedure.
Yes.
Staged accession makes a lot of sense, and we need to rewrite the Copenhagen process. Last point I want to make, the idea of Europe, which we've all subscribed to, the original idea was a Europe which integrates, the integration project, right? And this project, of course, has to this day not been fully completed. We're still working on the internal market. We have now huge discussions about capital market union, etc., etc. Very important projects. But there is now, because of the war, a second challenge for the members of the European Union, which is what Emmanuel Macron described in French as une Europe. We need une Europe qui protège. We need a Europe which protects us. A Europe which protects us is a very different union from the union that integrates. In other words, now we need to worry about outside threats and challenges. And that changes the dynamics and the nature and even the instruments. And this is why I am not afraid of watering down the European Union if we enlarge more quickly. And quite frankly, I would say, if we find ourselves watered down, there is nothing in the Lisbon Treaty that prevents smaller groups of countries to move forward on specific issues of common concern, like security or defense or the euro. So in other words, we have sufficient flexibility built in the system. All we need to do now is accelerate the process.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ischinger. I cannot agree more. The present geopolitical situation forced, in a way, European Union to change the procedure of the enlargement process. Should be less technical, should be more political. I would like to ask other panelists if they are in favor of such a change. Petar, you are the next. Please take the floor.
I'm really very glad to have Ambassador Ischinger among us. Just before the panel, we discussed how much our part of the world has changed over the last 20 years. What kind of expectations we had 25 years ago. I remember 2002, when the Council NATO-Russia was established. I remember vividly the words of then American President George Bush Jr. about the new era, a great alliance, NATO and a great country are working together in the future, etc., etc., etc. Some more optimism during that time. But let me say a few words from historical perspective, because I think it is important to be understood. Because this item, Europe and its neighbors, related to the classic antagonism between the locals, the familiar structured communities, and the others, whom ancient Greeks called barbarians. When the legendary Roman dictator Sulla decided to crush the last Greek rebellion in Asia Minor, the king of Pontus, Mithridates VI, called on his people and his neighbors to fight against and to be together against barbarians, Romans. For the ancient Romans, peoples crossing the eastern border of the empire were considered as barbarians. However, the names of these barbarian tribes, Thuringians, Bavarians, Franks, indicate that they were the forefathers, the ancestors of today's prosperous nations of Western Europe. At the beginning of the 19th century, in his world-famous book, The Prince, Machiavelli named the last chapter an appeal to liberate Italy from the barbarians. The barbarians were the French, led by their king, Louis XII, who had open aspiration for the northern part of Italy. What I want to say, even within the European continent, in the narrowest sense, there has been intolerance and even hatred against who belong to a foreign community speaking a different language and treasuring different traditions and beliefs. I remember what Montesquieu said, "No kingdom has shed more blood than the kingdom of Christ." Until the Second World War, even today's EU member states believe that military victory and domination over the neighbor is the only guarantee for the prosperity of their own nations. We have thousands of examples. And the bitter experience from the last war led to the historic decision to create the European Union. It is a fact that a number of institutional and political mistakes have been made within the European Union, of course, overexposed by Mr. Putin's propaganda machine. But if you look at the big picture, we should admit that after so many centuries of wars and destruction, the creation of the European Union guarantees peace in Europe, which compensates more than 100 times the imperfections, all imperfections and all the bureaucratic mistakes of Brussels. And this should be underlined. This is very important to be said once again. Europe, however, is not an island. Europe has neighbors. It is entirely in the European interest to be surrounded by neighbors who strive to build democratic and free societies based on the rule of law. And after the end of the Cold War, the EU accepted 11 Eastern European countries, including my own country. The European Union established two neighborhood policies: Southern Neighborhood Policy, Eastern Neighborhood Policy, which is a great achievement from my point of view. But in all reasoning, until now, one element is missing, I have to admit that, and this is Russia. In this conversation about Europe and its neighbors, Russia is the elephant or the bear in the room. Why? Russia plays a very significant role when it comes to European culture. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Turgenev, Chekhov, Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, Russian ballet. They belong without any doubt to the highest levels of this culture. This has always raised the question how Russia could give to the world such genius in culture. However, Russian society, on the other hand, has never managed, I'm sorry to say that, has never managed to build a democratic and free society. It appears that there is no relationship between the high cultural achievements and the ability of society to organize itself as a successfully functioning democracy, incorporating the rule of law, successfully tackling corruption, and without oligarchs siphoning the country's wealth. The big question now is, did the war in Ukraine put an end to the dream about Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, according to the famous words of French President de Gaulle? The process of Europeization of Russia started with Petar the Great. Almost 75 years after, Catherine the Great had to issue a special decree that Russia is an European country, and any foreigner who wanted a concession to trade with Russia had to confirm that. After Napoleon was defeated, Alexander I, the beloved grandson of Catherine the Great, during a victory parade in Paris declared, "We are Europe," meaning the union of the three emperors, the Emperor of Russia, the Emperor of Austria, and King of England. So, paradoxically or not, I remember in 1918 in Bad Godesberg, western part of Germany, the then President Gorbachev, Leonid Brezhnev actually in his speech mentioned about our common European home. It was during the Cold War, and President Gorbachev appeared to open the door for this idea. Frankly speaking, it was the happiest time for Europe. Both the Western Europeans and the Eastern Europeans, we were so much excited that finally Western Europe and Russia are going to work together. Things have dramatically changed over the last 17 years since President Putin's speech in Munich
Yes, in 2007.
2007, yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Ambassador Ischinger can witness from that, that's for sure. And now we must clearly say that Russia's war in Ukraine is the most testing challenge in the history of Europe after the Second World War. Without any doubt, first of all, so many casualties. But there is also a very serious political consequence. The war against Ukraine is a heavy blow to the European understanding of global order based on international law and the absence of territorial claims. Russia's war in Ukraine cynically negates all values and achievements of the European Union until now.
Petar, are you agree that we will be forced to live with different Russia, autocratic Russia, Russia who probably will threat our own security? Or, in your view, there is a possibility for Russia to be a democratic state and live with us in a completely different relations?
Because of that, I did this historical. I hope that one day Russia is going to become a democratic country with functioning market economy, that we could work freely with Russia. But until this day, we have to be prepared for everything.
Okay. Mladen, you are coming from Bosnia. You have been a Serbian member of the presidency. Bosnia now is on, I think, the right track to Brussels. What are your feelings and your comments on the enlargement process?
I will try to be a little bit provocative in my statements. And speaking about the neighborhood policy and the European policy, my first question is there any coherent EU policy regarding the enlargement? I think no. Realistically speaking, there was no coherent policy if we see that last 20 years. I remember the time of the enthusiasm after the Thessaloniki summit. I remember the relations among the players in the region, in the former Yugoslavia. They were so positive, all of us trying to make reforms, believing that we will be the members, believing that there is a chance. 2 years after the Thessaloniki summit, I was in a meeting of the European leaders, real European leaders at that time, who said, knowing that Bulgaria and Romania would be already the members, they said, and I remember that very clearly, after Croatia there will be no enlargement for decades, not years, decades.
Jean-Paul Juncker said it.
Not only him, even more significant political leaders at that time. So we, like leaders from the region, witnessed formal promises, the doors are open, in reality they were closed. I remember the time when some ministers said that our membership depends on the absorption capacity of the EU. And I asked my colleagues, absorption means that first you have to be digested and then absorbed. So I think that it was not coherent policy. Now, after some ups, downs, we are again a little bit, we have a chance to be again a little bit up. You know why? Because of the war. Without the war in Ukraine, there wouldn't be a chance for us to be the members. I'm quite sure. And the message is, if you want to advance, create a war. If you create a war, then you will be in focus. If you are peaceful, doing reforms, who cares? Because of that, maybe I'm a little bit too critical. But this is my experience in all of that. Things coming from the very sensitive country, which was, for which the precondition for the stability and normal development is really to be the member. I remember also the time when Romano Prodi was president of the Commission. At that time, a group of us proposed something which we called associated members, something like Ambassador thought a little bit. I spoke with Latko before. I simply don't understand why Europe not make step by step for us to show us that it's very serious for the membership. Like very small things which will be very significant for the people. Why not to treat our telecom companies not to have a roaming, which is nothing, doesn't cause any political difficulties. Or why not to treat our universities? Or why not to treat our healthcare system like a part of the European Union system? This doesn't cost so much, and it will be a very clear message to the people for these things. I think that we have to be innovative in all these discussions. Honestly, even if we did all the reforms, the current relations within the European Union is that it's very difficult. A lot of people have a fear of the new members with the veto right. Even if we are the most beautiful, they will say no, too early. We have our own difficulties. I personally don't know what are the chances for the European Union to create new rules. Honestly, I said to my colleagues in the region, I would really be there, like to be in reality, the member. If the condition is to say, I don't want to be to right for the next 15 years, okay, I'm fine with that. If the precondition is that my country will not have commissioner, I'm fine also with that. I think that we, from the region, we have to press the Europe to fulfill that and to say, okay, if you have difficulties with that, next 10 years, don't think that we can create a problem for you.
Yes.
And hope that in the meantime, Europe by itself will change some of the rules. Another also, and I think that this is something like that is possible, doesn't cost so much. The membership of the Ukraine is a bigger story, because the numbers of the net receivers will be completely different. Countries who are receiving support will be much different than we from the Western Balkans. We will not dramatically have any influence on that story. So I think that with a very clear vision, it's possible to show that there is a chance for us to be there. Yes. Without that, we will continue to have leaders in the region who are autocratic, the society which is based on the personalities and not on the institutions, and majority of the leaders will enjoy in that situation. I don't think that Russia has a lot of chances to directly influence there. First, they don't have resources, they don't have money, and this is not by itself a problem. But in long term can be. And because of that, I think that European Union interest is to be a little bit more active and to really stay for the commitment which they publicly said, and that this is not just formal. And finally, maybe it's time also for European Union to think about a little bit more concrete neighborhood policy, which is not only a part of the larger Western policies, meaning following just the US. At some point, is it European Union able for that or not? I don't know. They have to be a little bit more concrete regarding their neighborhood. They're not just following general framework which is developed by some other big countries. Thank you.
Mladen, as far as your provocative statement is concerned, we have already said the war in Ukraine has changed the procedure of enlargement process. Now it's much more political than technical as it used to be. Number two, Michel, the president of the council, said last year, I think, at Bled Strategic Forum, that in 2030, European Union shall be ready for the next enlargement package.
Shall be.
Yes.
Not
And I said it because you've mentioned this problem with, 6 new commissioners and all that stuff. I think the qualified majority will, change a little bit the nature of this dilemma in future. Okay, Milo, one more colleague from Montenegro, from the region. I think he will speak his language. So may I ask everybody to use this to understand each other? So, no. Milo, imaš riječ. Izvoli.
Hvala, Borute. Dame i gospodo, želio bih i ja da se na početku zahvalim uvaženim organizatorima, Međunarodnom centru Nizami Ganjavi i njegovom generalnom sekretaru, gospodinu Muradovu, na pozivu i na odličnoj organizaciji skupa. Zadovoljstvo mi je da u okviru ovog foruma imamo i ovako inspirativnu temu i zadovoljstvo mi je da neka razmišljanja na tu temu podijelim sa našim uvaženim moderatorom, gospodinom Pahorom, i sa renomiranim panelistima koji svakako jako dobro poznaju materiju i imaju što da kažu na ovu temu. Europska unija živi, rekao bih, veoma izazovno vrijeme i od ishoda iskušenja sa kojima se Europska unija danas suočava, definitivno zavisit će njena konkurentska sposobnost u promijenjenom geopolitičkom kontekstu. Oni koji su malo veći pesimisti od mene ili samo realniji od mene bi kazali da neće zavisiti samo geopolitička konkurentnost Europske unije, nego i sam njen opstanak. Rat u Ukrajini, iako pojavno predstavlja borbu za teritoriju i navodno pokušaj denacifikacije, u suštini je osporavanje prava na egzistenciju ukrajinske nacije i osporavanje slobode Ukrajini da sama bira svoj put u budućnost. No prije svega toga, to je rat Rusije protiv Zapada, u kojem je Evropa odabrana za primarnu metu. To je borba protiv evropskog sistema vrijednosti, podrivanje evropskog jedinstva, primjenom razuđenog repertoara hibridnog ratovanja, koji pokušava dovesti u pitanje i sam opstanak Evropske unije. Uz to, razne, a kontinuirane krize u Evropi i na globalnom planu pokazale su ozbiljne deficite političkog identiteta Evropske unije, prije svega u njenim ključnim politikama, vanjskoj i bezbjednosnoj. Naime, pokazuje se sve više da nije dovoljno dobar izbor biti dio inače pravilno odabranog vrijednosnog, političkog i bezbjednosnog saveza NATO alijanse. Evropska unija je morala i mora i dalje svoju neupitnu pripadnost euroatlantskoj porodici potvrđivati promišljenim i preciznim profilisanjem krucijalnih evropskih bezbjednosnih i vanjsko-političkih interesa. Nažalost, pokazuje se da će to biti sve teže u postojećoj institucionalnoj šemi Unije, koja omogućava da bilo koji član porodice dovodi u pitanje efikasnu zaštitu interesa porodice u cjelini. Također, Evropska unija je već gotovo 2 decenije usporavala ostvarivanje jednog od svojih ključnih ciljeva i nesumnjivih interesa, ujedinjenja Evrope. Izgleda autodestruktivno, ali je nažalost tačno. Evropska unija je najprije počela da se premišlja, nakon toga da usporava, sve do potpunog paralisanja svoje, prema ocjenama i same Unije, najuspješnije politike proširenja. I tu sada, Borute, dolazim do odgovora na tvoje pitanje. Dakle, riječ je apsolutno o zanemarivanju političkog aspekta u odnosu na administrativno-tehnički aspekt pitanja proširenja i ujedinjenja Evrope. To nas dovodi do najvažnijeg aspekta teme ovog panela, odnosa Evropske unije i susjeda, pa pa bih u nastavku kazao neku riječ o primjeru Zapadnog Balkana, odakle dolazim, i koji je godinama zvanično prioritet evropske politike proširenja i ujedinjenja. Stanje na Zapadnom Balkanu danas je znatno lošije nego prije 10 godina. Nakon okončanja ratova na prostoru ex-Jugoslavije, izgledalo je da je dogledna budućnost članstva u Evropskoj uniji usaglašeni cilj svih država regiona Zapadnog Balkana i neupitan interes same Unije. To je optimistički sledstveno značilo da su balkanski nacionalizmi, rak rana našeg regiona, poraženi i sahranjeni i da su ideje o promjeni granica kako bi postojeća multietnička društva bila zamijenjena mononacionalnim i monovjerskim u teritorijalno uvećanim državama, da su te ideje konačno odbačene. Ispostavlja se da smo se prerano obradovali. Dovoljno je bilo da se nakon deceniju dvije obećavajuće harmonije u odnosima Rusija-NATO opet obnovi tradicionalno nepovjerenje, pa da balkanski nacionalizmi u tome prepoznaju šansu za aktualiziranje svojih ciljeva. Naime, njihovi autori su na tradicionalnom stanovištu da njihova retrogradna politika osvajanja teritorija i osporavanja identitetskih prava susjeda nije konačno sahranjena zajedno sa 150.000 ljudskih žrtava koje je ubila u ratovima 90-ih, nego da tada samo nijesu imali dobro vrijeme za svoje ciljeve. I da im se to vrijeme ukazuje sada u kontekstu zaoštravanja odnosa na relaciji istog-zapad. Nažalost, to vremenski koincidira sa potpunim obustavljanjem politike proširenja Evropske unije. Logično, to ohrabruje i parališe ozbiljne reformske napore u svim državama Zapadnog Balkana. Time se ostavlja čist teren za upliv politika vrednostno suprotstavljenih Evropskoj uniji. Očekivano, Rusija vođena svojim geopolitičkim interesima efikasno koristi prepušteni prostor i daje značajan zamajac antievropskim politikama. Danas Rusija, htjeli to da vidimo ili ne, preko svojih proksija na Zapadnom Balkanu kontroliše značajan dio našeg regiona. Epilog je vrijednosno devastiran prostor Zapadnog Balkana. Očigledna je opet potpuna politička konfuzija i dezorijentacija po pitanju budućnosti tog regiona. U takvoj atmosferi počinje rat u Ukrajini sa lako uočljivim potencijalnim konsekvencama na Zapadni Balkan. Danas je, nažalost, opet na dnevnom redu iskonstruisana dilema. Da li Zapadni Balkan treba da bude dio evropskog sistema vrijednosti ili će ostati na milost i nemilost retrogradnim nacionalizmima i interesima sukobljenih geopolitičkih sila koje na tom raskršću, istorijski gledano, redovno odmjeravaju svoje snage. To nije pitanje samo za Zapadni Balkan. Ono je još značajnije za Evropsku uniju. Geopolitički kontekst se promijenio i dalje će se oblikovati. Biće veoma delikatno da Evropska unija sa svim deficitima o kojim sam govorio na početku svog izlaganja sačuva i unaprijedi svoju geopolitičku konkurentnost. U takvoj težnji najmanje joj još treba i dalje nerazvijan, nestabilan Zapadni Balkan koji će, kako ko poželi, zloupotrebljavati protiv Evrope, njene stabilnosti i prosperiteta. I kratka dosjetka samo za kraj. U Titovoj Jugoslaviji učili su nas da se naša zemlja graniči sa brigama. Riječ briga je zapravo izvedena iz početnih slova susjednih država Jugoslavije. Bugarska, Rumunija, Italija, Grčka, Albanija, Mađarska i Austrija. Ispostavilo se da je Jugoslavija postala preteška briga za sve njene susjede. Ne bih želio da budem zloslutan, ali je i Evropska unija danas okružena brigama, koje mogu uticati i na sudbinu nje same. I podsjećanje, još prije Ukrajinskog rata, kolumnista njemačkog nedeljnika Zeit, Ulrich Ledurner, je napisao: ako se raspadne Evropska unija, to će se dogoditi tamo gdje je najkrhkija, na Balkanu, tamo gdje na nju s polja djeluju moćne sile. I samo jedna rečenica, za zaključak, kao lični utisak. Ako Zapadni Balkan nema evropsku budućnost, ako nema Evrope ujedinjene u vrijednostima, stabilnosti i prosperitetu, teško mi je da vidim i dugoročnu budućnost same Evropske unije. Zahvaljujem.
Yeah, Milo, briefly, you've mentioned Russia and proxy countries in the region. I would like to ask you if you can be a little bit more explicit on this. But how far do you think Russia would go to make some political and geopolitical damage in Western Balkans? How far Russia would go, according to your experiences?
Teško da je potrebno da pojašnjavam ono što predsjednik Rusije govori o tom pitanju. On je nedavno u intervjuu američkom novinaru objasnio svoj doživljaj prava Srbije u regionu. Također, teško mi je da tumačim dodatno neke poteze koje čelnici iz Republike Srpske, prije svega jedan od njih, također saopštavaju na istu temu. Ja ne vidim da nam oni ostavljaju dovoljno prostora za razmišljanje o tome na koga Rusija računa kada je u pitanju budućnost Zapadnog Balkana. Što se tiče pretpostavki dokle je predsjednik Rusije spreman da ide, sigurno da nijesam jedan od najpozvanijih da daje te prognoze. Ali sjetit ću se samo razgovora uoči agresije na Ukrajinu, koji sam imao sa tada predstavnicima nekih od najuticajnijih zemalja u Evropi i u svijetu. Saglašavali smo se, dakle bio sam i sam dio tog mišljenja, da teško da predsjednik Putin može imati interes za agresiju na Ukrajinu jer je prethodno neke svoje najvažnije interese ostvario. Već je potencirao važnost Rusije za globalnu stabilnost, oslobodio je Nord Stream 2, a cijene naftnih derivata su na tržištu dostigle maksimum. Pa je on opet izvršio agresiju. Izvucimo iz toga nauk koliko je danas pametno prosuđivati racionalno o opasnostima koji slijede iz epiloga ukrajinskog sukoba. Hvala.
Thank you. Joseph, you are next in line for taking the floor. Malta is a beautiful country, neighboring also the north of Africa. We are speaking a lot about the eastern side of European Union, but just maybe you will also touch this important aspect of the neighboring policy. Please, you have the floor.
So, thank you very much, Borut. I will take a page out of Mladen's playbook. I think we should be as provocative as possible over here in order to fulfill our role as a think tank at the end of the day. So, I do believe that one of the main problems that I have witnessed in more or less the 40 council meetings I have attended is people speaking in tongues. So to me, the main problem is not the countries which are vociferously and publicly opposed to enlargement. It's those countries who say one thing in public and at the end of the day do another thing within council. And that is lack of leadership, I believe. And over 8 years, I have witnessed it in a most repeated of manner. My concern is, if I start first on the Eastern and Balkan, I wouldn't call them neighbors. I think it's a misnomer. It's the extended family. For me, the neighborhood is another thing which I will come to very soon. I think that the mistake of the attitude of our friends in this part of Europe is that they have approached so far the enlargement prospects from a price takers or a market takers. So what I would do in their place and what I see as a flagrant absence is consolidation from their side. So really and truly what Mladen was saying, the recognition of telecom companies within the European roaming system, so on and so forth, I would start first by having that sort of consolidation within the Balkans itself, between Balkan countries, between Eastern European countries which are not part of the European Union. Having a sort of EFTA, let's put it that way, which would then make it even easier for the so-called absorption process within the European Union. I think that one of the main problems right now, or at least main deficiencies that I see from the candidate countries or the aspiring countries to join the European Union, is they are all taking it on an individual basis. And I think there being a consolidation amongst themselves to, I wouldn't say negotiate together, and most of the time I have seen an approach where actually one candidate country would be the other candidate country's worst enemy when it comes to enlargement. I think that having a consolidated effort, a consolidated, even formal organization would help a lot, not only those countries to prepare themselves, but also within the integration system.
Sorry, Joseph, are you talking about package approach or?
I'm talking first of all about alignment between those countries, because that would show, we're willing to align ourselves amongst each other, 5, 6, 7, 10 countries. It makes it easier for you to then integrate us within the European Union, especially if that sort of regulatory alignment is a conscious decision, which then makes it almost impossible for the formal excuses to be put forward again. So I see that as a flagrant absence in the approach from candidate countries. My second point is then to the neighborhood. I believe that the real neighborhood of the European Union is not the Balkans. That's the extended family. The real neighborhood is the Mediterranean. It's the North African countries. And then again,
yes,
the European Union is sadly again reacting to crisis rather than by strategy. On the other hand, other powers, namely China, obviously, is right now much more active in North Africa than we are. And then we always lament that the Chinese are influencing this part of the world much more than we are. So yes, I do believe that a lot has been done, so I'm not one who will go EU bashing. I think a lot has been done. There have been packages that have been put into place, yes, but we're not strategic enough. And we always think of sort of second-guessing what other people are doing. So in many ways, and I hope I don't shock too many people, I do believe that a second coming of President Trump is a blessing in disguise for Europe. As in, again, it will bring Europe to its senses that what was being called our strategic autonomy should again take center stage. It's a given that has to happen. My final point, I for one, and I believe I will not be popular in this room for saying so, I believe it's a mistake to peg European Union membership solely as a security issue. I believe that if one approaches it solely from a security point of view, the retort one would have would be, there's NATO for that. Because most of the time, I believe we mistake NATO for the European Union. Yes, most of EU members are members of NATO, but the EU is not NATO. So if there is solely a security perspective, there is NATO for that. The EU is much bigger than that. So that is why I see, say, Ukraine's membership status as a mistake in the medium term, because it's solely political. It's not ingrained into a process, and it will lead, I believe, in the next few years to a great deal of dissatisfaction by the Ukrainian people itself, which will push Ukraine from the European Union and towards other spheres of influence, namely Russia. Because I don't believe there is a genuine interest in making Ukraine part of the European Union. And it was simply a political decision taken in a moment of crisis, which even the wording itself of that political decision shows the indecisiveness of how it was taken. My final point, which is a paradox maybe to what I have been saying, is that if we want to approach European Union membership in terms of crisis and security, then let that be it. But let's be consistent in the way we do it. And some years back, I did hear one interesting idea by the now late Prime Minister Berlusconi, when he was being asked about, the Middle East and so on. And in the same line of thought, I would say the same thing, that when looking at the crisis in Israel, with Hamas, and the justified plight of the Palestinian people to have their own state, the only real option that I see, and again to be provocative, is to offer Israel European Union membership, and in exchange for the full recognition of a Palestinian state and sovereignty by the Palestinian people, which would give Israel its identity within the EU. I believe that Israel fits within the EU. I think it can be assimilated and integrated extremely easily without any economic and political problems. And it would give the security aspect, it would give the identity aspect, and it could help, if acceptable, give the Palestinians what is their by right and what has been a political frozen conflict for so many years in many ways. I know I'm being very provocative, but I think this is our role, to think outside the box and not just repeat the mantras of what is said around the tables publicly, also because, and I conclude, what is said around the tables publicly, again, in my experience in the European Council, is not what is said behind closed doors, and I've seen almost punch-ups and bar brawls over there at untimely times of the day. And I think it's better to speak one's mind rather than speak in tongues.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
As you said, there is no need for political correctness at such panels. You've mentioned Israel. Israel has a status, I think, observer status in the Council of Europe, for example. Okay, Ivo, you are coming from the country, the very last one, to be a full membership of European Union back in 2013, 11 years ago. What do you think about it?
So firstly, I will focus my discussion on so-called Western Balkans because I think it's the nearest neighborhood of European Union, and we'll start with a very simple statement. Europe is not complete without Western Balkans. So I think it's in the best European interest to include Western Balkans into European Union. But there is always but. The but for me is connected to capability of European Union from one side, but also very depending on capability on the other side, on the particular countries from the so-called Western Balkans. Why? Firstly, there are Copenhagen criteria. They looked relatively clear. But what is going on now? We have geostrategic problem, security problem, that force European Union to not to be so clear about criteria. That means that political criteria, security criteria are in some kind of confrontation with Copenhagen criteria, not only technically but politically as well. That's an important problem, and it makes a European position towards particular countries not very clear. Not very clear, especially in the context that countries are being changed, not only are neighbors of European Union, but European Union itself. If we now revise membership of some member countries, I'm not very sure that all of them will pass criteria, especially political criteria. That's one statement. Secondly, there is no coherent and no single security and foreign policy of European Union. It's important weakness of European Union, and I'm of those Europeans not dominating in political spectrum that claims that European Union must be more integrated if European Union is willing to play an important role on the political scene. More integrated. But unfortunately, many leaders from European Union followed one wording from our area that is, it's better to be first in the village than second in the city. And it's a very big problem of further development of European Union. So let's go back to Western Balkans. There are many important differences amongst the states in so-called Western Balkans. And what I always stress, destiny of those countries are primarily in the hands of political elites of those countries. The best example is Bosnia and Herzegovina. Unfortunately, there are three, not one, three elites in Bosnia and Herzegovina not capable to agree on anything. So I advocate that it's very important to open negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina as soon as possible. But unfortunately, thoughts of some elites in Bosnia, not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in all countries, that we are going to be accepted by time, not performing really reforms, not willing to adapt ourselves because they need us. It's wrong approach, and I will be very happy to see political elites, governments, presidents advocating reforms. Unfortunately, reforms are not very, very efficient in some of countries. So I would like that all those countries from Western Balkans, because I really claim that they must be members of the European Union, must, because of them and because of European Union. I claim that destiny is in their hands, primarily in their hands, and capability to change themselves, to perform reforms, because if not, due to these compromises between geostrategic interests of European Union and Copenhagen criteria, they can easily witness destiny or repeat the destiny of Turkey, to negotiate and negotiate for 20, 30 years. And Turkey is the best example because Croatia and Turkey opened negotiations in the very same day. And now, unfortunately, I'm sorry for that, no one is thinking seriously about Turkey membership in European Union. That's pity for European Union, but also for Turkey. Because Turkey is also a little bit different, but really part of European society. Huge, important country. And the European Union should be much stronger with Turkey than without Turkey. The same situation is it also with Western Balkans. So I will end, I will not burden you anymore. My conclusion is be self-confident. Believe in your membership and perform reforms. Without that, no European policy will take you to the European Union. The destiny is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. 3 excellent panelists to go. I would like to ask every one of you to be brief. I would like to offer the audience a chance to ask or comment on our debate. Please, Andris, you have the floor.
I will, I will try to be brief because otherwise Lazar will never have a chance. I think there are a couple of issues that I would like to address, but I will focus only on enlargement because everything is important, Joseph indicated, but enlargement is basically a key for failure of the European Union or success.
Right.
There are 2 aspects that we should not neglect. One is European countries, despite all this mobilization of war, have domestic political agenda and elections there. So that means that European Commission is crucial and everybody blames it, but they are the ones that basically are able to go through the process with trying really to accommodate and push ahead. Yes. So that's why I think always to go away from bureaucratic process is not easy. Then the urgency of enlargement. I liked very much the date, 2030. And here I think the date could be done by accession candidates themselves. Because as Joseph said, if the message is strong, each previous enlargement country may target date when we will be ready. If it's more consolidated, you put more urgency. Then stage accession, I think it's something new for Western Balkan with a plan is being proposed. It's not perhaps perfect, but there is roaming. There are things that you could achieve and you capture broader political support at home. Right. I think that is already there. And now the most difficult part, how to accelerate the process. Because what Joseph mentioned is important to note that December Council, it's in a way names the start of accession for Western Balkan, some countries, for some continuation for Ukraine and Moldova, and they are important part of it, but it did not really open the window of opportunity. And that means that the political work that we discussed today need to be strengthened because this opening window is always very short. So that means that there is some consensus. And here I would end that there are no real problems on EU to accommodate on current treaty basis. If there is worries that backsliding, you could include it in accession treaty. In financial terms, even if Ukraine would join, it would increase the EU financial framework, what we have now, to 1.2% of GDP, 0.1% of GDP more. It's not big deal. It does not change beneficiary and paying country balance. So there is no real things that could be a break. And that means that all the people that really believe should say, well, there is a needed to be created window of opportunity. Yes. And it is right now. That window was created in previous enlargement. Different countries sent it at different time in the EU. But at the end of the day, they all benefited from this window. So I think this political window of opportunity still need to be created.
Thank you so much, Andris, for this excellent political messages. Ilir, your next one.
Okay, thank you, Borut. I think that Balkan has been historically the Achilles heel of Europe, and in this tense situation geopolitically, after also the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, I think that it's very important for European Union to complete itself by fulfilling our aspirations for membership, being more flexible, being more also pushing us more to deliver faster, quicker. And I fully agree with Milo that Russia is trying to use its proxies in our region because Russia has its own traditional roots in our region and tries to undermine the achievements that we did in the last 3 decades, and also to divert attention as much as it can, and to show the weaknesses of the EU or of the NATO. And for that, Balkan is always easier target, I think. So it's fundamental also for you to be focused more on Western Balkans, and thanks to this Russia aggression against Ukraine, EU has been committed more recently. Also, fortunately, Berlin process has been vitalized again because EU was letting huge space for this so-called open Balkans, which was a process that was creating many divisions in our region and was not based on standards. But now I hope we are going in the right path, and it's fundamental also to increase the efforts by EU and also US for this Serbia and Kosovo normalization. This is fundamental, and we want Serbia to be part of EU as soon as possible, but also we want Serbia to behave as a democratic and as a European country in the relation with all neighbors. And unfortunately, we have seen in the last months efforts to justify violent actions and provocations, as it was in the north of Kosovo, where terrorist groups, let us say, were attacking and provoking, and some of the responsible people are still free in Serbia and not being responsible for what they tried to do. It's fundamental for the Western Balkans to find itself in this situation in order not to be a victim of this rivalry. And secondly, I think also it's fundamental for EU to empower itself by paying more attention to our region and completing enlargement with our region, because I think it will make EU stronger and safer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ilir. And now I will pass the floor to Lazar. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And well, let me start by saying that I feel really privileged to be part of a panel with such distinguished personalities. But I also feel privileged for the fact that being the last to speak, and after what has been said here, I think that there is quite a few that remains for me to say. And so that enables me to be, and I hope I will be quite brief. First, what I'd like to say is that I really congratulate the organizers of the Gajavi Forum, Baku Forum, for including this topic on the agenda of this edition of the forum, because it has really to do with the capability and credibility of the European Union when it wishes and says that it wants to be a real global actor. And the credibility, first, I think, depends upon what the EU is doing in its neighborhood. And from this perspective, I fully agree with what has been said here, that the European Union needs to enhance its strategic thinking. And here I fully subscribe to what President Ivanovic was saying about the fact, for example, that I'm absolutely sure that, including in what is now the war in Ukraine, the European Union, probably having had a country like Turkey inside the Union, that would have enabled the European Union to act even in a more substantive way. Not just, but also when we think about the Middle East and so on. Point number one. Point number two. Since 2013, it emerged also from the discussion of today. At least since 2013, after the Croatia's accession to the European Union, the enlargement process was in a way of kind of, let's say, a pause. And it's good that since last year, important decisions were taken in order to revive this process. One question which was raised to me by a friend was, did the European Union need to have, did we need in Europe to have the war in Ukraine to be aware about the fact that the enlargement the Western Balkans have to become members of the European Union rather sooner than later? And that brings me to the following remark. When it comes to the process of accession, it has been conceived as a win-win process. But when it comes to the way how it was carried out, my impression is, and I'm speaking also as one who has been experiencing directly my country's accession to the European Union, the balance between what I would say joint effort and conditionality. My impression is, and this is also valid for the Western Balkans, it's good that very much accent was put on the need of fulfilling conditionalities. But I am not sure whether this request was accompanied by at least equal assistance or joint efforts. I'll not elaborate more on that. My third remark, the need of coherence, or more coherence and correlation among the various initiatives taken by the European Union. A few years ago, the conference, the idea of a European political community was launched. 1 year ago, there was a summit of the European political community in Chisinau. And there was the idea of having within this summit also a summit of the Eastern Partnership. For reasons difficult to understand, it was not accepted to have it. Or that means, I mean, that speaks about the correlation between the various initiatives of the European Union. And last remark, also better cooperation and synergies with other regional organizations. And I'm now referring, for example, to the organization I now have the honor to represent, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization. There has been a substantive interaction between the two organizations. But as of late, because of the war in Ukraine and because the Russia is part of this organization, I see kind of, let's say, reluctance or reservations into moving ahead, further enhancing the cooperation between these two organizations. And I think that may apply also to other regional structure of cooperation. That's what, these are my remarks, and with this I will stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lazar. Since there has been a consensus on almost all important issues, I think there is no need for replies from the podium. I would like to ask the audience. Yes, gentlemen over there, you would like to pose the question or a comment? Please, somebody gives the microphone to the gentleman.
My name is Frank O'Donnell. I arrived in Belgrade a few days after Mr. Milosevic lost power, and I was there to 2004 covering for the UN, Serbia and Montenegro. And in January 2003, Prime Minister Zoran Đinđić and I had a long conversation in Belgrade, as a result of which we organized a conference for him on the 12th of March 2003. Unfortunately, he was shot dead that day. And with Romano Prodi, as others have mentioned, we discussed at the funeral the importance of protecting and saving Serbia's reform process. And this led to the Thessaloniki commitment of 2013. And indeed, I would say on the question of consolidation that Prime Minister Muscat mentioned, the Stability Pact of Southeast Europe under the late Erhard Busek did a lot in that direction, including, for example, with free trade agreements in the region. But I think the problem we have today is that Belgrade remains the nub of the problem in the Balkans. And President Meta pointed his finger to an extent correctly in that direction. Let me be less diplomatic about this. The EU and the United States have been complicit in enabling the delinquent behavior of the current government in Belgrade for years, and only lately are waking up to the fact that more needs to be done with carrots and sticks so that Belgrade aligns itself more effectively with EU values. Ironically, in Belgrade today, Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians and Serbs protest together against the war in Ukraine. A Russian democratic society has been created by Peter Nikitin, and we are not giving enough support to an alternative to the Putin regime, not only in Russia, but in the Balkans. Thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody here is of a hope that Serbia will be on our side, that will be in the package of all Western Balkan countries to join EU. Will be a challenge, but I think we should do our best to inspire Serbia to join us. Anybody else? Yes, Wolfgang, please. Would you pass the microphone to? You will ask about Turkey, or?
Yes, as the former EU Minister and Chief Negotiator of Turkey, I felt that I should take the floor. Turkey is celebrating the 61st anniversary of signing the association agreement and 20th anniversary of starting negotiations with Croatia. So I wish good luck to all of the newcomers in the system. But my suggestion is, one of the leaders of the European Union once said, to become member, if there is political will, you will become member in a few months. If there is no political will, then they will say your tomatoes are not enough red, and your vegetable is not enough green. So we must wait for the political concentration to come until the moment of membership also is valid. But of course, European Union is not an international organization. It is affecting our everyday life. The quality of the water, the quality of the air, your democratic standards, social standards. So I think even not becoming a member of the European Union by adopting the European Union acquis communautaire, every country can progress further even though they are not members. That's what the mentality. But I have two questions.
Please.
One is to my friend, Prime Minister Muscat. Having Israel in the European Union to solve the problem there, it came to my mind that we can also have Russia in the European Union after so many murders and loss of lives. Russia can also adopt into the European Union with its culture and, as President Stoyanov has said. And second is, of course, my English wasn't enough. Perhaps Ambassador Ischinger can help me. He said it's a shame to keep, since 2003, these countries. I couldn't find a terminology in English to be used for Turkey.
It goes to Wolfgang or the second question?
To Ischinger.
Yeah. So, Joseph.
So, Berlusconi had actually said that too. I refrained from saying the part on Russia for obvious reasons. No, I honestly believe that there is an alignment. So my position on is the conflict, and I come from a country that was probably one of the first European countries to give diplomatic status to the then PLO. So our historical alignment is very clear. I was also the first prime minister from my country to visit Israel and to meet formally the Israeli government. And my point was, if the Palestinians are talking to the Israelis, why shouldn't we? I believe that there is an alignment between the two societies, and I believe, honestly, I believe that that could be part of a very provocative solution, given the fact that the situation right now is leading nowhere. My second point is to what Andris is saying about the window of opportunity. I believe that he has captured the phrase adequately. There is a window of opportunity that is slightly ajar, but it's up on the 50th floor. So I think that shows, so let's look at the political jargon. Even the latest communication, as he said in December, there was much hype about it, but those who could read what was actually written were not too enthusiastic about it.
Thank you. Wolfgang.
Well, thank you for your question. If it's a shame that the country of the Western Balkans have had to wait 20 years and there's still, no concrete progress with regard to Turkey, I would say it's a tragedy. In '99, this is like 25 years ago, I was dispatched by my government, by Chancellor Schröder at the time, to negotiate with your government the details for candidate status, which we then achieved in Helsinki at the end of '99. But then, for reasons we have no time to discuss here, we seem to have parted ways in a way. The lesson I've learned after 45 years in diplomacy is one should never say in diplomacy, never. There is no categorical never. And I would think that the EU, as a geostrategic actor, would be seriously strengthened, not only if Ukraine were brought into, but certainly also if we could recreate a way for Turkey to become part of the family. Even if I have to admit that Turkey is a large chunk for the EU to bring in. This is a different dimension than most of the countries sitting on the panel.
Mladen, you wanted to add a small sentence.
Very few, just a short comment. First, I want to say to Joseph that there is agreement among the telecom companies in the region. There is no roaming in the region. Last 2 years. Second, the question is why the regional cooperation is not so good. We have one example, Open Balkans. only 3 countries agreed that there are no borders, that the people can go exchange, that mutual recognition of the diplomas, and that the trucks will be not controlled on the borders. Serbia, Northern Macedonia, and Albania. Other 2, Bosnia and Montenegro, have some conspiracy theories or reality that this is under the, let's say, big influence, especially of Serbia. But this open Balkan is supported by the US. On the other side, what is the alternative from the European Union? Why not to use the Berlin process to achieve the same, with the more trust, to support this that we can, that the trade can go without the borders? There is a lack of the activities. And then the big question is also why the US is supporting Open Balkan. And there is no clear alternative from the European Union. So the things are not so simplified. They are much more complicated, and we simply have to know a little bit more about the reality. And by the way, I will repeat what is my opinion. Russia doesn't have a clear strategy in the region. They are using very cheap political resources on the ground. On the long term, I don't see that they have very specific concerns because they have too many problems in their neighborhood, which is more of their interest in this. But the local players, some of them are very cheap, and they use that.
Thanking all the panelists, I would say on behalf of all of us, our thanks to the organizer that he given us the opportunity to talk about these extremely important issues. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen.